Welcome back to another episode of War Room Huddle Podcast, an RFG Advisory podcast for independent financial advisors who want to crush everything and take their A game to the next level. Brought to you by RFG Advisory with your hosts, Shannon Spotswood, Bobby White, and Rick Wedell. This is War Room Huddle.
Welcome to War Room Huddle. Today we're going to spend some time digging into a topic that is really on the top of a lot of advisors' minds, as the average age of an advisor in our industry is just north of 60, and that is succession planning. And we're going to frame it up a little differently today. You know, there is a lot of bankers out there who we really love and we respect doing podcasts, doing webinars, hosting conferences that are really focused on the succession plan for the advisor with a practice, 200 million, 500 million, north of $1 billion. Those are obviously very attractive sized practices in which to structure a succession plan around.
By attractive, to be clear, the bankers can earn a lot of fees. That's
you know,
okay. Yes.
So we're going to focus on the segment of the market that is really practice size between 50 million and call it 300 million. So joined today in War Room Huddle by Rick Wedell, Chief Investment Officer at RFG Advisory. Welcome.
Thanks, Shannon.
And Rick is uniquely qualified to have this conversation. So you all know him as the Chief Investment Officer at RFG, responsible for managing our in-house investment strategies, Bluemont. But prior to joining us on our mission to build the RA of the future, Rick was in the seat at Bain Capital for 12 years, where he played an instrumental role in really helping, the financing packages, designing deal terms, negotiating term sheets, and really thinking creatively around how to structure buyouts. So we come at this with, I think, a really unique perspective, and you've got a lot of knowledge to drop this morning.
Well, I appreciate
and every
that.
morning.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Okay, so in your words, frame us up. What is the practice profile that we are talking about that this is really a relevant conversation for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you think about your typical sort of $50 to $200 million advisor, they tend to be what I will call sole proprietors, right? So this is not an advisor team. If it is an advisor team, it may be that in name only, there is normally one sort of figurehead and or rainmaker that is kind of making all of the day-to-day of this stuff work. And I kind of like to maybe frame it up as the, hit by a bus, test, right? So like if that sole proprietor were hit by a bus tomorrow, the business would just sort of disappear, right? And that is different because that is when you think about selling something like that or creating the succession plan for somebody like that. It is different than, if you're in, let's say, a partnership or, you're a $500 million practice and there are 6 advisors. And so one of them gets hit by a truck tomorrow and the rest of the advisors in the practice just sort of pick up, as if there was nothing, no hole left other than the obvious emotional one. So like, it's one of those things where, a lot of people that are in this industry, they're independent or they're on the independent side or they're running their own practice, they're running their own book, they're living a good living, they're making a good stream of cash flow. They've got somewhere between $50 to $150 million in assets. Maybe they have an admin, maybe they have a couple of admin. But at the end of the day, it's usually that one individual that is the key to making everything work. They are the advisor.
Right. And so let's, start this conversation really tackling the misconceptions. So the misconceptions associated with I'm selling my practice, I need to find a successor.
Absolutely. And there are a lot. I think, and look, these are going to be some dirty little secrets, and there are going to be a lot of people that maybe don't want to hear the truth, but we're just going to speak the truth. So that's okay. The first is this misconception that I can continue to run my practice indefinitely into the future and just own the cash flow associated with it, and that'll be fine. I never need to move off into the sunset. And here's the couple of problems with that. One, you're kind of doing your clients a disservice at the end of the day because at some point you are going to be checked out, right? Like we all talk about, our clients' end of life plans. Like at some point you're going to check out as well. And your clients want that handoff to happen in a controlled fashion, not in an uncontrolled fashion.
They don't want to be in crisis.
They don't want to be in crisis because you're in crisis. They want to know that you have handed something off. And then the second part of that's really related, tangentially related, but it is a well-known industry fact that a lot of people don't like to talk about, that as advisors age, the growth rate of their book slows down. And it's not because, I just don't have the hustle in my step that I used to. It's because nobody wants to refer someone to an advisor that is older than they are, or to an advisor that's in their 60s, 70s, mid 70s. That referral stream just starts to dry up because your clients know that you're eventually going to retire. Like they know this. You and I have seen this time and time again with retiring advisors, where there's a younger advisor that steps in to acquire the practice, and all of a sudden assets start to come out of the woodwork, referrals start to come out of the woodwork, and commentary from the clients is like, oh, thank goodness. Right. I've been waiting on this announcement for however long. I've been worried about what your succession plan was and what that handoff was going to look like. And in reality, clients are not going to bring you new assets, and they're not going to refer business to you if they're worried about what your next step is. That's not really relevant if you're in your 50s or in your 40s, but when you start to get into your 60s and 70s, it becomes very relevant very quickly.
Well, and what's interesting about that, and what is, to some degree the elephant in the room, is that the advisor is having conversations with their clients about planning for retirement. So you're having the conversation directly with the client about retirement, and yet you haven't addressed your own.
That's exactly right.
And so you're just kind of setting yourself up for being unreferable.
That's exactly right. All
right. So I want to tick through.
Wait, we have other misconceptions.
Oh, keep going.
We have other misconceptions.
Okay. Run your practice indefinitely in the future. There is some reality around your referability with regards to the age. Misconception 3.
Misconception 3 is this notion of margin and valuation, right? So sometimes
I'm glad you brought that up.
These sole proprietor practices really pride themselves on running a practice that has almost no overhead, right? Like they're not investing in, marketing dollars. They're not investing in operational support, talent, whatever it might be.
Talent, tech, ops.
Exactly. Yeah. And so as a result, they look at it as like, well, I make, $100,000 a year in top line, and I'm taking home $80,000 of that. And isn't that great because my margins in my business are just so incredibly high? And here's where the reality sets in, and something that I think we're going to talk about, or I hope we talk about a lot in the podcast, is when you sell your book to someone else, right? And you are in this position of, I'm a sole proprietor, I'm selling my book, I'm transitioning away. It's not to somebody that I necessarily brought up behind me as my protege or succession plan in the industry. I am transferring these clients to another advisor. This other advisor has their own way of doing business, right? Like they've already got their established processes and procedures. They've already got an admin team, a support team. They know what they want to do on the asset management side. They know what their overhead structure looks like, right? And it's not yours. So just because, you might be running at an 80% margin business, most people in the industry, particularly those that are younger and still growing, are running it more like a 50% margin. They're going to value your practice based on what their margins are, not based on what yours is, which is a different way of saying that when you're selling a book, right? Like if you're a sole proprietor and you haven't spent the time to develop, the partnership model, if you're just selling off your clients, you are more likely to be valued at a revenue multiple as opposed to an earnings multiple.
Any more misconceptions?
What else am I missing, Shannon? What else am I missing?
We'll probably bump into it, but I think that's a good place to start. I want to tick through some questions that we get asked a lot. Number one, all right, I'm hearing you. I need to get focused on what is my succession plan? Do I hire a banker? Knee-jerk reaction, do I go out and hire a banker?
No, do not go out and hire a banker if you are less than $150 million in size, because let's be real, and with all due respect to the bankers that are out there, what you are more likely to run into at that scale is a business broker, not a banker. It is not going to be super well marketed. And let's face it, there are a lot of individuals out there that are interested in acquiring retiring advisors' books. Like, it is not hard to find acquirers. Fit is very important, right? Like, when you go to hire a banker, you're bringing a banker to the table in part to help you structure the transaction, but also in part to just make sure that there's, 15, 20 people that show up at the auction. In this case, there are a lot of advisors that are out there that are willing to do this. Financing is not that hard to obtain, particularly if you're going to go to an established advisor, what's something I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. It is don't hire a banker, right? Like it's not worth your time and effort. Do hire a lawyer. A lawyer is a good idea. When you get to the point where you want to draft all this up and document it, lawyer is a great idea. Banker, less so.
I'm going to come back, but I want to stay since you brought up legal counsel.
Okay.
Yes, hire a lawyer, but should that lawyer be your brother-in-law?
No.
Your neighbor?
No. Now is not the time to have your sister's brother's, cousin, etc., who does real estate law to take a look at, whatever transaction you are pulling up. You want somebody who has done this type of transaction before. And when I say this type of transaction, I mean documentation for a financial advisor selling their clients to another financial advisor. Lawyers are funny. I love lawyers. But if you're an accountant, you focus on accounting. If you're a, financial advisor, you focus on investments or financial planning, whatever that might be. If you're, a lawyer, you focus on legal, right?
Risk.
And it's very important for lawyers in the space to be familiar with what is standard in the space and what is not, right? So, for example, if you've never had an accountant that's dealt with a transaction in this space, they may not realize that, look, this is all goodwill, so it's all going to be taxed at capital gains rates. There is no cost basis really associated with your practice. And so they may get hung up on, is it an asset sale or is it an equity purchase or this and that and the other, when in the reality, it doesn't really matter that much in our industry. When we think about, attorneys, you might get hung up on the same type of thing if they're not familiar with what kind of industry standard looks like. So God, no, do not use your brother-in-law for this particular transaction. It's too important. And generally, family members, not great to do business with anyway. So anyway.
I'm going to underline that really quickly. With the deals that we have basically, and for the most part, every deal is going to almost fail before it gets over the finish line. Like, these are emotional experiences, and it will be the only time you sell your practice.
Mm-hmm.
For most of you, it'll be the only time you sell your practice. So there's an added element of emotion attached to that. But where the deals have been at the finish line, and it's a great, win-win-win for all parties involved, and it gets on the ropes, it's because of the lawyers. So choose that counsel wisely.
Are you an advisor looking to make the move to independence? RFG Advisory is an innovator in the wealth management industry with a winning culture and a fully integrated tech platform designed to help advisors take their practice to the next level. Let us get to know you at rfgadvisory.com.
Okay, this one I feel a little bit like, let me just jump into the crocodile-filled waters because I have a sense as to how you're going to answer this question, which is, do I need a valuation? And before you answer, I want to say, remember, for the purposes of this this conversation here in War Room Huddle, we're really focused on advisors who are 50 million to say 300 million. Do I need a formalized valuation?
No, you do not. Look, the acquirer is going to go through your book, right? Is going to want to know something about your clients, right? So if you have a problem in your client base, which by the way is likely to accelerate the more you age, it is one of those things, as advisors get older, their client base tends to age kind of right along with them, particularly once you start to hit that point where you're not adding a whole lot of 40-year-olds to the pipeline. Right? Like if you reach that age where you're not getting the referrals, you're not getting fresh business in, then your book is slowly growing older with you. That may start to present a little bit of a problem. And that may be a point where, an acquirer says, oh, geez, I'm not necessarily sure I want to do this. The reality of the situation, though, is that most acquirers are acquiring your revenue stream. They are planning to integrate it into their practice, right? The time to develop, your protege and, bring along that new advisor in the industry that just got his, CFP or her CFP and maybe, just graduated from the local business school and is going to be my apprentice. Like that time was 10 years ago, right? Like you're at the stage now where that ship has sailed, right? If I'm going to really do this and I'm going to do it successfully and I'm going to do it in a way that my clients want to see, then I'm going to be selling my book of business, my client relationships to an established advisor that is not going to care as much about how I did business. They're going to focus on the way that they do business, right? And because of that, you're going to get valued on revenue. And I'm just going to tell you, it's roughly 2.5 to 3 times trailing 12-month revenue, right? That is the multiple that is pretty standard in the industry. You might see a little bit above that. You might see a little bit below that, but it is generally right around that range, right? Is where the multiples are in the industry. And in a weird way, it's up for you, and we'll talk about this as we talk about protege and everything else like that. You're looking at me on the other side of this podcast right now and saying, well, what do you mean, they're not going to care about the way I do business? In a weird way, it's going to be up to you as the seller to go out and find an acquirer that you like and agree with, right? Like that we see this all the time and talk about fit of and once you find that fit, and we'll talk about this some more in a little bit, but once you find that fit, it's very important to just know that, I don't need to go out and pay somebody to get a valuation. I don't need to pay somebody to do this, that, and the other, whether it's 2.75 times or 3 times, trailing revenue. If that fit is there, then the multiple will be appropriate and it'll be accretive for everybody.
Right. I love the distinction that you made. You used the word protege versus acquirer. And thinking about, as you enter into this process of, I need a succession plan, it's the right thing to do for my personal balance sheet. It's the right thing to do for my clients. It is a necessary part of the business. What is the difference between my protege and an acquirer?
Right. So there tends to be a little bit of this notion in the industry, right? And I think it's a very noble narrative, right? Of I'm bringing up the younger generation of advisors and I've hired somebody that, is just like a young me and I'm going to train them in the industry. And they're going to know my clients because I introduced them all and they're going to do business just like I am. And then, someday, I'm going to ride off into the sunset and, I'm going to hand off all my clients to that individual. And that individual is going to be the one that basically acquires the practice. Okay. There are 2 problems with this strategy. The first is it takes time. a very long time to gradually grow that person into the advisor that you want them to be, right? And there tend to be personality clashes along the way, right? Like, there's a younger generation of leadership. There's an older generation of leadership. So-and-so wants to invest more in marketing. So-and-so doesn't, like whatever it might be, right? There tend to be clashes along the way. And so like, if you've identified this person as your succession plan, and you get 3 years into it and you guys have a fight about something or this and that and the other, then you're restarting the clock all over again. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you're in your 40s and 50s, you can think about like, okay, well, if that's my vision for the way that I want my firm to be built, then you better go out and hire a pack of junior advisors right now to be that succession plan when you actually want to retire. And if you're in your 60s and 70s, I'm just going to tell you it's too late, right? Like that window has closed. It is time to go out and find an acquirer. Now, what does an acquirer look like? An acquirer looks like an established advisor that has their own book of business, which normally should be about your size or larger, right? So it doesn't, from a financing standpoint, it's very hard for that $20 million gung-ho advisor to pull together the financing to buy a $100 million practice. It's not impossible because I've seen crazier things, but it's way, 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 way easier if we're talking about a $70 million advisor acquiring another $70 million advisor's practice or something else like that. Those deals are much, much easier to do, right? From a structuring standpoint, from just a coherent standpoint. But you need to understand as the seller in those transactions that this is an individual that is buying a book, right? And when they're buying a book, they're looking at it not as like, oh, these are great client relationships, and I want to bring those client relationships in and run them the way I run my existing practice, right? So you get to tell them when they're buying your book how you think the train should run, right? Like they already have how the train should run. It's your job to find one of these people that has a train schedule that you like, right? Like, that's the whole goal, right? Like you want to find an advisor that does business in a way that you like, that you are comfortable passing your clients on to. Your job is not to tell the acquirer that they're doing their business wrong, right?
Which brings us to that notion of fit.
Yes.
Like what is the matrix of deciding fit besides just like we jihad? Like I like you, we've got, a connection.
So there's high service, low service practices. There's what does the practice focus on? Like, is your practice focused on financial planning or is your practice focused on investment management and selection? Is your practice high touch, right? So, if you're used to talking to your clients 4 or 5 times a year because you have, fewer households and much larger AUM per household, then probably not a great idea to sell to somebody that's like, nope, like I'm more of a churn and burn operation where like, I'm talking to each one of my clients once a year, right? That might be just a 30-minute phone call to check in on whatever it might be. So you want that fit and feel to look generally like what your clients look like. There may be some values that you want to share, right? So some people are, very conservative, right? And you may want to go find a very conservative advisor. Some people are super ESG focused or whatever it might be. They want to go find an advisor that looks like that, right? So that there's a little bit of the like, here's who I've identified my success, my practice to go on to. And it's in a weird way, it's your job as the seller to identify that buyer that fits and feels. There are a lot of people that are out there that are willing to buy practices, right? Like tons of folks that are out there. You need to, just get to know the folks in your area and identify who might be that nice plan.
Do they have to be a perfect fit?
No, they do not have to be a perfect fit. For example, they need to be a perfect fit on like the 1 or 2 ways that you define your practice, right? So like, if you are a planning practice first, right? And you go and try and sell to somebody who's like, we don't do financial planning, that's probably a problem, right? But if you're like, on the investment management side, I use predominantly individual name, equities, right? And I'm selling to somebody who uses more, ETFs and mutual funds, like that may not be a problem if that's not how you define your practice, right? Like if you don't define your practice by, security selection, then it's not as important. And in fact, you're never going to find the perfect match, right? And it's not your job to tell them that they're doing their practice wrong, right?
A little bit of a sidebar, but as you were talking, I was thinking about technology, because so often, in this business model where you have a very high margin, you've got an 80% margin, you have massively underinvested in tech. And while I'm not willing to declaratively state that all younger advisors who are sitting in the role of being the acquirer are all high tech, but I'm pretty much willing to bet that they're all focused and have tech enabled practices. So how does technology factor into determining fit? Meaning, so oftentimes we hear with our older advisors that we're structuring, my clients don't like tech. My clients don't use it. They won't check it's not important to them. This is not a value.
First off, you never know whether or not your clients value it or not until you actually give it to them and see whether or not they use it or not. And there are a lot of biases that go into that question. Everybody in the country at this point has some type of smart device, right? Tablet, iPhone, whatever it might be. Grandparents connecting with their grandkids. We see this all the time. And it's just one of these things. Like, I want to be clear. Your clients love you. Right? Like when you're 65 or 75, 70 or whatever it is, like you've developed those relationships with clients and like candidly, like I have this conversation on the other side of it when we're trying to, when I was with a client, I was on the phone with a client, a prospect the other day who's like demonstrably distressed because we've kind of shown them like, performance is awful. Like there's no planning work being done. And your advisor has literally moved to the lake, right? Like they don't even have an office in the city anymore. Like they live 3 hours outside the city and like they haven't met with you like one-on-one in years, right? Like it's just phone calls. And like the client is looking at me being like, okay, I know all of this is true, but,
Time out on the floor.
Time out on the floor. No worries.
Where's your sign?
Where's my sign?
Can you grab me a sign, please? Sorry about that. Lives 3 hours away.
Yep.
Start there.
Yep.
Okay. And the advisor literally lives 3 hours away at the lake. Like he's not coming in. Like there's no one-on-one meetings anymore. And the client is the prospect is looking at me and saying all this and being like, yeah, but I've done business with him for 20 years.
Right. He knows me.
And I know this is the case. And when this guy retires, like I want to move on and everything else like that. But it's hard for me to rip that Band-Aid off. Your clients love you. Right? Like they are not going to leave you because you don't have technology to offer them. That does not mean that they don't want it, right? Like they will be relieved when you go in and identify, like we see this all the time. When you announce a succession plan and like you bring on and this is who's going to be taking over the business and here's the way that, meet their team and everything else like that. It generates buzz and excitement that your clients get excited about it. They're excited that you're retiring and moving on, or at least planning for it. They're excited about this new relationship that they've created. And they're excited that you've gone in and actually put in the thought to who should they be working with going forward? The fact that you've given that individual their blessing or your blessing is huge in the client's eyes.
I mean, that's such an important point. That might be the takeaway of all takeaways from this. That's the golden nugget of how much they appreciate you making the hard decisions for them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And before I lose it, I just want to circle back to one thing, okay? Back to the acquirer versus protege. The thing to realize about when you're selling your book to an established advisor is their business is, they have the same AUM that you do. They are successful in their own right. They are going to have ideas about how they run the practice going forward. Those ideas aren't necessarily going to always line up with yours, but so long as your values kind of line up about how you're going to treat these clients and what you're actually providing to them, it'll be okay.
One more question on just, alignment and fit. What about fees? Do you have to have the same fee structure as the acquirer?
You do not. We have seen in multiple cases, where, maybe there's one advisor that's got a lower fee and, they're moving into a higher fee or whatever that might be. You should be aware that, the advisor may adjust your fee schedule in the future to more conform to theirs. And I've seen that happen in both directions, right? I've seen it happen where, you were charging for a third-party manager and they're not going to charge for that third-party manager because they're not going to use one. And so they're going to lower the client's fee, in that way. I've seen it happen the other direction, right? Where, there's an investment management service or something else like that, and they're stepping up the fees of the portfolio. That is ultimately the decision of the acquirer, right? Like, you are handing off your clients. And your clients, your clients will work with the new advisor to determine what's appropriate and what's not.
And I think the key point there, as we've seen it from our experience, is don't let that be a deal breaker. Mm-mm. Don't let fee parity be a deal breaker. And it's similar to my clients don't want technology. My clients won't pay a higher fee. Those are all, to some degree, misnomers.
I agree.
We always have a choice of what attitude we're going to bring into life. The attitude that we bring into it is up to us.
It's worth doing, it's worth freaking crushing it. It's in the business world too. It's adaptable and it's transferable. I transfer that over to my business dealings and dealing with my employees, dealing with my partners. If it's worth doing, not only is it worth doing right, but it's worth freaking crushing it.
The ultimate goal isn't to succeed or fail. The ultimate goal is to give it everything you have for something that's on your heart.
What is absolutely 100% true to you that you know for sure that is going to set you up for success and that's going to pull you through the toughest moments of your life?
RFG Advisory is getting ready to crush everything like you've never seen before, and we want you to be a part of it. You'll be a part of a special elite group of advisors who will spend 2 days with veteran Navy SEAL Team 6 hero and founder of Dynamis Alliance, Dom Rosso, with Navy SEAL Team hero and best-selling author of Man in the Arena, Eddie Gallagher, and to cap it all off, sports icon and motivational speaker, Tim Tebow. Morning crush it workouts with the SEALs, bourbon tasting, panel discussions bridging SEAL team training to being a high-performing advisor. Head on over to rfgwc.com to sign up now for the Warrior Advisor Conference 2022 and claim your spot. Okay, let's get technical. This is like your favorite, your sweet spot. Let's talk about deal structure.
Okay.
So deal structure, big picture, and then what should you be seeing in a term sheet?
Okay. Wow, that's two very big questions.
Yes.
Let's talk deal structure to begin with. In general, with these types of successions for your sort of $50 to $150 million practice, our best results are generally seen with a 12, max 18-month transition period. This is something where you may want to start to have the conversation with the acquiring advisor earlier than that to just sort of, kick the tires and, break bread with one another, get to know one another. You're just kind of identifying who that is. But when you start to come to brass tacks and you say, okay, look, now is the time I want to go ahead and start to sell this thing. Typically you're looking for 12 to 18 months. The clients will dictate that this happens because they love you. But as soon as they're introduced to the advisor that is going to be working with them for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they're going to want to work with that advisor. It is natural, right? Like, you are the person that is on the way out. The advisor, the acquiring advisor is the one that's sort of ascendant, if you will. And they're going to want to get to know that person, right? So typically we're targeting about a 12 to 18 month transition period where really you're just kind of helping the clients get to know the new advisor, okay? And that's your job. Your job is to really transition those client relationships as successfully as you can. Make sure that, if there are client concerns, that those are being addressed. Make sure that the clients are happy. Like that's your goal. That's your job during that time period. Typically from a structure standpoint, you're gonna get, some amount of money up front and then some amount of money at the end of that transition period. And that amount of money at the end of that transition period will be what we call at risk. In other words, if you sign up a deal and then none of your clients go to the new advisor, then you may not get that second payment. And there will be some structuring that goes into, okay, how do we measure that? And, what do those benchmarks look like? And, all of that type of fun stuff. But typically, an acquirer will have some idea of, okay, well, we're just going to measure it on revenue, or we're going to measure it on number of households, or we're going to measure it on, whatever it might be. And you get your first payment up front, 50 to 60% of the purchase price up front, and then you get your second payment at the end of it based on how successful the transition is.
You rattled really quickly as we were opening up about the tax treatment of these deals as it relates to legal counsel. So in terms of deal structure, what should you be looking for there?
In terms of deal structure, it should be capital gains. Unless you have done something crazy, it is not at all difficult to structure this as capital gains. The phrases that you want to avoid in a term sheet are anything, called an earnout payment or a bonus payment or a success payment. You want to avoid those, but that's one of the reasons to get a lawyer involved and maybe your accountant as well.
Okay, so why? I mean, those are pretty standard terms in a term sheet.
Okay. Well, so yes.
Let's talk about getting cute with deal structure.
All right, let's talk about getting cute with deal structure. The short answer is don't, right? Like the easiest, and God, I don't know what it is about people that like to really overthink and overcomplicate things, right? But like, if the notion is, hey, I'm selling my practice, it's worth $1 million, we've agreed to that. I'm going to get $600,000 up front and $400,000 12 months later, so long as 90% of my households, have transferred, right? Which would be a pretty standard deal structure, something around that. Then the term sheet should just look like that, right? And we see a lot of people that maybe they're not deal people, maybe they're not, for a lot of people, this is the only deal that they've ever struck. They're not serial acquirers, whatever that might be. I see a lot of people that like to try and get really cute and complicated, right? Like, well, but you're going to get 25% of the incremental revenue associated with, helping me increase the fee of clients. And when I transition into the new cost structure and save money on the blah, 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 and, I'm going to give you an earn-out payment based on successful marketing attempt. Like, just don't, okay? Because people get so wrapped around the axle on this stuff. And to your point earlier, the easiest thing to do to blow apart a deal is the legal side of it, right? And we get stuck arguing about some stupid rep and warranty that's really only going to matter in like 1% of cases.
Probably less than.
Like you do not want to be that. Like the cleaner and simpler things are, the better.
As you were talking, I was thinking about, why do deals get complicated? Why do we get too cute with our deal structure? And it really is around the mitigation of risk. So talk about negotiating the prenup, because we see that all the time with the acquirer. You start to have these conversations about what does that second bite at the apple look like, or what are the terms I want in my prenup?
Yes. So let's talk about prenup, but I am going to disagree with you just a little bit. I think term sheets get complicated for two reasons. One is the amount of risk, right? But the second is this desire to get more than my practice is actually worth, right?
Ooh,
And
I like it.
This was a joke, but it's a well-known one on the banking deal side, that if you give me two things to choose, if I can either choose how much to pay for something, or if I can choose the structure in which that sum is going to be paid, I will choose structure over amount every single time. And it is true, right? Like, so you see people create these like fantastic, it's a 10-year revenue split that declines over time and blah, 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 blah. And all of these things usually ignore the present value of money. But it sounds great because it's like, yeah, you're getting, instead of getting 3 times revenue for your practice, you're getting 4 times revenue for your practice with the potential to get 5 times revenue for your practice. It's paid out over a 15-year period at ordinary income rates, but like that headline number of what the check is worth is just so sexy. Your practice is worth 3 times, 2.5 to 3 times revenue at capital gains tax rates. That's what it's worth. Okay, let's just establish that. On the prenup. So if you're not ready to sell, don't sell, right? Like if you are not ready to go ahead and say, yep, I want to begin the 12 to 18 month process of retiring and introducing my clients to their new advisor and having that conversation about like, this is your new advisor now or your new team now or whatever it is. And on a go forward basis, I'm going to be around if you have any questions, but like, here's the new contact info. If you are not ready to have that conversations with your clients, don't sell your book. Okay. Because if you are ready to have that conversation, then the prenup kind of doesn't matter as much, right? Like we're not forming an operating partnership here that's designed to last through, in the context of marriage, we're not getting married. In fact, we're agreeing that I'm going to be done with you in 12 to 18 months, right? Like, so I don't need to negotiate what a breakup looks like. The breakup is, I'm 100% focused on trying to get my clients to go work with this new advisor, which they will love you for, right? And then I am going to exit peacefully stage left, right? And that's where, like, we haven't really talked about it. I know you want to talk about the emotion.
We're coming to that.
Okay.
Yeah, because I want to stay a few more things on deal structure term sheet. One, do I have to accept a seller note?
No, not in today's interest rate environment. You do not have to accept a seller note. Seller notes do a couple of things. It enables some flexibility between you and the acquirer, because you can kind of make whatever that seller note look like, kind of whatever you want it to look like. And so, as opposed to a lump sum payment or something else like that, you're kind of cutting your own cloth. And we come back to this, I see term sheets get really complicated when it's like, yeah, there's going to be an 8-year seller note at a 3% interest rate. And that's the way I was able to get to, getting 3.5 or 4 times value for my practice or whatever it might be. And keep in mind that the interest on a seller note is actually taxable at ordinary income rates. And even if there's no interest on the seller note, the IRS imputes an interest rate on a seller note. Like you can do it. It's a creative way, to potentially drive structure. But a cleaner structure is going to be the acquirer just comes up with cash. And if the acquirer is roughly your size and they are paying you about 3 times revenue for your practice, they really shouldn't have a problem getting that deal 100% financed, at least in today's environment. Like it shouldn't be that hard for them to do. And that way you don't have to take on any credit risk associated with the seller, right? Like you're getting your 2 payments, and then at the end of the day, if the seller, does something stupid with their practice or something else like that, you're not on the hook for it. So do you have to accept one? Absolutely not. Would I encourage you to accept one? Absolutely not, because that's where structures get funky. But if you want to get creative about deal structure, then you can. The times that we most frequently see seller notes employed are in the protege model, actually, because those proteges, if they're paying you 3 times the revenue of the practice, they normally don't have their own book to be able to leverage, to be able to borrow the money to make the acquisition financing
They're
work.
your servicing advisor on your practice.
Exactly. And so the financing gets really tricky, and so you kind of have to take back seller paper.
Okay, so quick little sidebar, and this is for the acquirers. I'm in a partnership, so 2 young advisors. I'm in a partnership. We're, 70 million, 100 million, whatever we are.
Mm-hmm.
Should we finance this individually on our personal balance sheet, or should we finance this acquisition, this succession plan through the company's operating agreement and through the company's balance sheet?
Woo. If you finance it through the company, the bank is going to want a personal guarantee anyway. I think it's cleaner to just put it on the company's balance sheet if the company is the one buying the money and the clients are rolling into the company, and we're going to be splitting, the revenues, associated with this. I think it's cleaner to just put it on the company's balance sheets. Borrowing it personally, it's going to appear on your own personal credit statement, this and that and the other. And either way, the bank's going to get you for a personal guarantee. If you default on it one way or another, the bank's going to find you. So I would keep it on the side of the company. I think it's cleaner that way.
Yep. Anything that you want to touch on in terms of other, either boogeymen in the term sheet, anything around minority rights? I mean, I think we've hit that point really hard on keep it simple, stupid. But is there anything else as you've looked at these term sheets, as we've structured these term sheets that we should touch on?
I think the cleaner that you can make it, the simpler it is. And in these deal structures where you are selling to an acquirer, right? Like, there really shouldn't be that much at the end of the day to argue over. You are not, and I we'll talk about this. We're going to get to emotions. I know we're going to get to emotions. But when you've reached this stage, you really need to be of the mindset that when I get that first check that I am receiving, my job going forward is not to provide financial advice to my clients. I mean, it is, but it's not to make all the trains run on time and decide what marketing event we're going to do and do all of the things that I've done up to this point, right? My job for the next 12 to 18 months is to introduce my clients to the new advisor that will be taking over my practice and help that transition happen as seamlessly as possible. Educating the advisor on what those clients' needs are, introducing the 2 of them in that conversation where there's an introduction, making sure that like all the relevant points come out. Like you're introducing this advisor to your family in a way, right? Like, and you want to make sure that that transition goes smoothly. So it's not really like, I know it sounds weird, but like when you get that initial upfront payment and you've inked the deal and you've said, yep, this is what's happening, then you want to be of that mindset of like, yep, for the next 12 to 18 months, like my job is to transition my clients to the new advisor.
And public service announcement, please really take that to heart, because the biggest disservice that you can do to the acquirer is to sabotage them in the communications with your client, whether it's around, the investment management's going to change. I wouldn't do it that way, but seems like that's how they do it.
Right.
Or around the fee discussion or around the service model. Like really put all of that that ego, that instinct, that, just desire to get that one last little subtle jab in there, like all of that needs to be put by the wayside because you really are number one cheerleader for the succession plan that you have structured.
That's exactly right. And by the way, for the acquirers out there that are potentially listening to this and thinking about what should go in a term sheet, this is why that success metric at the end is so very important for that second payment, is to help ensure that everybody's motivated and on the same page as to what does success look like. And for the purposes of one of these transactions, success looks like at the end of 12 to 18 months, all of your clients have agreed to work with the new advisor. That is it. And that is all, to borrow, Bobby's famous catchphrase. That is success. That is how we are defining success. And let's not confuse anything else with success. You want the relationships to transfer, which is why you did all the work on the front end to identify an advisor that you would feel comfortable working with your clients on a go-forward basis, right? Like if you don't feel comfortable with them, then whatever.
Don't do it.
And one other bugaboo in term sheets that I will just mention is, and it's up for debate, the notion of what you might get paid during the transition period really depends on how much are you getting upfront and how much are you saving for that last payment, okay? So if you're going to take most of your capital off the table up front, which is what I encourage you to do because it de-risks the transition, you're going to get paid nothing or maybe just a little bit for the 12 to 18 months while you transition your clients. You're going to be working for the transition, working for that transition payment, okay? If you take a much smaller payment up front, say, I want to transition the book and then we'll get paid, then you can expect to maybe get paid a little bit more over the course of the transaction.
Think of it as salary.
Yep.
All right. Quickly before we go to emotion, timing. What should I expect as I go from listening to this podcast to I'm going to close a deal? What's the timing of this?
You're going to close a deal. Okay, first we have to figure out who are you going to close a deal with? And that is a very intricate dating, scenario. You got to identify, who that might be. Where are they located? What does that value fit? You have to approach them and say, hey, I'm thinking about retiring. Would you be interested in acquiring my practice? Kicking off that conversation. Don't be shy about having that conversation because a lot of the advisors that are out there that are in their 40s and 50s, are interested. Folks, you need to find somebody out there that is younger than you. I forgot to mention this. Like when you're, this is
not just 5 years younger.
Yeah, no. Like your advisor, your clients do not want to be handed off to somebody that's like, oh my Lord, we're just going to go through another handoff 5 years from now. Like that's dumb. You wanna hand off your book of business to someone that is, that will stay in the business longer than the lives of most of your clients, right? Like your clients don't want to transition twice if they can avoid it. So going out there and finding that, that acquirer is actually the longest part of the process. Having those conversations, talking about what it could look like, what it might look like, how it should work, et cetera, are a very nebulous, and what we tend to recommend is, you know what? I'm going to sign the way that it should look is I'm going to sign this deal. You guys are going to take over all responsibility. The acquirer is going to take over all responsibility for the actual management of these clients going forward. So at reviews, administrative work, paperwork, everything else like that gets taken off your plate and integrated into the acquirer's practice. And really, it just becomes up to you to say, look, I don't really, if I'm getting administrative support, I'm getting it from one of the acquirer's people. I'm just rolling forward as, it is my job to introduce people to their new advisor.
Which is why I think it's so helpful, given the nebulous nature of identifying that successor, that acquirer, that you really have spent some time thinking through your matrix. Like, this is the valuation range that I expect. This is how the deal is going to be structured. This is what are the must-haves for me in terms of fit. Like, spend some time before you start having those conversations so that you can very quickly weed people that you're talking to out of the process.
I agree. I completely agree. But that is the process that takes the most time. And it's sort of like, asking somebody, how long does it take to find, whoever you're going to marry, right? Like, I don't know. It can take a while, right? Like, it can happen very quickly or it can take a while. You've got to get out there and find that right person, but you're not going to find them if you're not looking. This is one of those, right. You need to get out there and start to identify folks that are out there, that are in the industry, and just look around.
And have your elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Know your practice. This is what my book looks like in terms of client segmentation, age. Do I have client concentration in terms of, 5% or more of my revenue is sourced from these clients? This is my fee structure. Like, put the time in to just develop that synopsis on your practice and then the matrix of what you're looking for, so that those conversations are really productive. So when you have that moment where you're like, you know what, this is a viable candidate who may be my successor, you're ready to move on it quickly. Because the reality of it is, once you've identified the successor, how many months does it take to close?
Like 2-3 months
right.
max. It's not a long process to put the deal together. You can, particularly, and this is once again a plug for, if you're working with professionals that do this stuff regularly, it will not take very long for them to just, pull everything together. And once again, why you should not use your brother-in-law for this. That is the surest way to get this thing gummed up and blown up and screwed up.
All right, emotions. We call it the 7 stages of deal grief. Let's go through the emotional side of this whole process, which, quite honestly, just like advisors making a transition, succession, the biggest hurdle to actually taking this leap forward is around your feelings. It's emotions.
It is true. And it's, I think from a self-awareness standpoint, let's just step back and acknowledge, like, what is one of the greatest things that we do for our clients? It's behavioral modification. It's talking them through their emotions. We see it on the investment side, right? When investors start to make, poor decisions based on their emotions. We see it when our clients retire. Right? Like, we see some clients come to this notion of, oh, hey, like, I can't wait to be done and out of here. And we also see clients that are like, God, like, I mean, I know I can retire right now, but like, what will I do with the rest of my life? Right. And I think in particular, if you're an advisor, you've built your practice, you own your book, it's your family, right? It is your family, yep. Right? These clients are family. You've worked with them for 15 or 20 years. There's this notion, 30 years. There's this notion of like, I don't want to retire. Like, I don't want to leave these people. And, I would highlight to you that you're not, right? Like, if you form that type of relationship with them, you will still get Christmas cards. You will still be in their lives in some way, shape, or form. But you need to have that conversation with yourself to say, what is my best service, right? Like, how can I do my clients the best service? How can I do myself the best service? How can I think about retirement in the best way? Because, we talk about this all the time, like, things go bump in the night, right? Like, we always plan for clients to live to 95. I think when we plan our own lives, we always plan for clients, for ourselves to live happily ever after. But the reality is that, particularly when you're in your 60s and 70s, things like memory issues, things like, just mental fitness, things like, God forbid, death, they happen. And you're doing your clients a disservice if you have gotten to this age and all of a sudden are leaving them in a position where, something happens to you and there is an abrupt handoff, right? It is the moral equivalent of dying without an estate plan or a will, or my favorite, right? Like, it is the moral equivalent of when the husband passes and the wife has absolutely no idea what the couple's financial picture looks like, right? Your clients are left to sort of pick up the pieces of, well, what was my financial plan and this and that and the other, and you want to not do that disservice to your clients. So reality, you got to kind of come to that emotional decision that like, yes, it is time for me to retire. It is time for me to move on. I've made a great living. I'm going to get paid well for my practice. I should have enough. If I've saved, if I practiced what I preach, I should have enough to retire. And, it is time for me to move off into the sunset.
Couple things on that. More often than not, when we start the conversation, and you touched on earlier that average transition is 12 to 18 months, we start that conversation with, in 3 years' time, I want to retire, or in 5 years' time, I want to retire. And so let's just hit this like smash mouth right in the face on this one, which is the handoff is going to happen between 12 and 18 months. The clients are going to want to work with the new advisor. New assets are going to flow into the practice. New referrals are going to flow into the practice. So you come to the end of that 12 to 18 months and you've convinced yourself that you're going to work for 3 to 5 years. What do those years look like? If you've successfully advocated with the acquirer, I want to structure this deal over a 3-year time frame or a 5-year time frame, and in their eagerness to get the deal done, to get it closed, to be able to assimilate your practice, you're like, all right, fine. We'll just pay this guy. We're going to let this woman hang around for the next couple years. I mean, how do you deal with this?
It's a really difficult. So this is for the acquirers that are out there, and then we'll talk about for the sellers. For the acquirers that are out there, you do not want this option on the table. So if anything over sort of a 3 to 5 year, anything over really a 3-year transition period should really be discouraged if the point here is to transition the clients to the new advisors. You can make the math work on, a 3-year transition and you're still paying somebody sort of a nominal salary or something else like that. Like you can make the math of the acquisition work. But the reality is that, every deal that I've seen that has a very long time frame, even the deals that have a short time frame, the selling advisor changes their mind through the process of like, oh God, like I'm done. I don't want to be coming into the office anymore. I don't want to be doing this anymore. You will see things, despite our coaching on the like, you're not selling your business practices, you're just selling your client relationships. You will see new things that the acquirer does that make you mad for some reason, right? Like, that they only do quarterly client calls, and I like to call my clients, once every 6 weeks or whatever it is, right? Like, and you're going to bristle about it. And that's okay. Right. But the longer the transition, it's kind of like, I don't know. It's just one of those things where if that long transition, that long period of exit is just not something that anybody finds pleasant. And your clients will be confused by it, honestly. Right. You need to really wait. If it were me, if you sit down with yourself today and say, I want to retire 3 years from now, then your job right now is to go out and identify all of those different dating partners that are out there and talk to them and, figure out what might be possible and what it might look like and this and that and the other, because that's going to take you 12 months to do, right? 6 to 12 months to do. And then once you've identified those individuals, or that individual, then you can start the negotiation process. If you are really thinking to yourself, I need to take some money off the table and de-risk, but I want to continue to work for the next 10 years, then I would look at you and say, you can go work for a captive and accomplish that, right? I don't think any of us want to do that if you're already on the independent side. You're living it's a fairy tale. Like no one is actually going to let you do that. It's just too long of a transition period. What you're really talking about there is a partnership agreement. Partnership agreements, when we all know that there's a, relatively short time frame to them, are tough.
Part of the ego is wrapped up in, I've been doing this for a long time and I have my licenses and I'm about to sign this agreement. I'm going to sign my practice. I'm going to sell my practice and it's going to have a non-compete, non-solicit in it. Should as the selling advisor, should I expect to have to hang up my licenses? And what are the terms of that? And how does that wrap into just the emotional side of this deal?
It varies case by case. What I would tell acquirers is if you're really, really worried about it, you shouldn't do the deal, right? Like if you are really, really worried about the seller popping up, a year or two later and starting to steal all of their clients back, you really shouldn't be doing the deal in the first place. There's a lesson I learned a long time ago, right? The Indian parable about the tiger, right? Which is, when the tiger rips your face off, it's not your fault. It's not the tiger's fault. It's your fault for being around the tiger in the first place. And so if you think you're about to do a deal with a tiger, you should probably turn and run the other direction. And that applies to the sellers as well. Like if you get to the point where you're like, there's no amount of legal paperwork that's going to protect you if somebody wants to screw you. That is just not the way that works. And just the legal fees alone. Anyway, surrendering your licenses is kind of the ultimate it's the ultimate ask. It's the ultimate like, yep, I know they're never coming back into the business again. If you're a seller and you're definite that you're like, yeah, I'm out of here, you might offer it and be like, yeah, non-compete, non-solicit, like I'll surrender my licenses. I don't care. And that may make the acquirer feel better about the deal. If you're an acquirer, I'm not sure I would ask for it because in asking for it, you may set off this sort of emotional firework display that you may not want.
Any other warning signs? You kind of touched on warning signs. Any other warning signs either the acquirer or the seller should be looking out for? I mean, we've touched on fit. We've touched on the tiger ripping your face off.
The acquirer should be excited about the possibility of acquiring your business. If they are not, that is a red flag. So they should be looking at it as, this is a huge opportunity. This is a great way for me to sort of double the size of my business. The cash flows associated with this, it does not take very long to figure out that they are pretty darn accretive. So the acquirer should be excited about the business that they are acquiring. From a seller standpoint, so as a seller, you want to meet somebody that, that wants to date you, right? Like if they act like they don't want to date you, you should probably move on. If you're the acquirer, the more it looks like this individual is ready to sell and be done, the better, right? So if the seller is approaching you and saying, gosh, I really, I want to be out of here in, 6-7 years, then, politely have coffee and keep lines of communication open, but don't waste too much of your time because that really just is indicative of somebody who's not really willing to sell or not really ready to sell. There are certain people in the industry that have gotten reputations. You will know them around town of, folks.
Serial daters,
right? Like, I've got this practice and I really want to sell it. And then every deal blows up, at the 10-yard line or whatever it is. If you're an acquirer, don't waste your time. And if you're a seller, don't be that guy or gal, because you will eventually become non-dateable. What else?
I think we covered it.
I think that's it.
Any other parting last words of wisdom?
Look, a lot of this industry deals with life in transition, right? Like, whether it's transition from savings to retirement, whether it's estate planning and we're transitioning wealth from one generation to the next, whether it's, transition in a career or transition in healthcare or whatever else it is. And it always is surprising to me, the sort of the cobbler has no shoes effect. This is an industry where you do see people that just sort of work on and on forever. And I guess what I would just encourage you to think about is the service, what type of service level are you providing to your clients in that particular analysis? There comes a time to hang them up. And the best time to do that is a time when you can still have 2 or 3 years to make that happen, to find that individual or group of individuals that's going to buy you, to negotiate the term sheets and to organize a successful handoff of the client relationships. And so really, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're thinking, it's time to start the process, then, I encourage you to go ahead and think about what that transition looks like. I know being an FA is a great lifestyle, but retirement, if you do it right, is even better. On
that mic drop, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to War Room Huddle. War Room Huddle is a production of RFG Advisory, a leading innovator in the wealth management industry. To learn more about RFG Advisory, head on over to rfgadvisory.com and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of War Room Huddle.